What's going on, Star Wars fans?
Hello there.
We have a special guest today, the host of A Guy Who Loves Star Wars. Mike is here. What's going on, my friend? How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Awesome. We're really excited to have you on here. We watch your podcast all the time, and I'm glad we got some time to get on here and talk about Star Wars.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know you're a busy guy. You do the three lives a week and then a
Yeah.
bunch of shorts. So it's really cool. If you haven't checked it out yet, you have to go over to YouTube, check it out. It's all positive stuff like it is here at Star Wars Jedi Chat. We're always talking good things. Mike's always talking good things, talking about all the new stuff that's coming out. So it's really cool. So
Please
uh,
check it out.
yeah. So, Mike, give me a little bit of background of your Star Wars journey and sort of how you started out with whatever you started, whether it was animation or the originals or prequels. What was your journey into Star Wars?
Yeah. So obviously, being as I guess I'm a 22-year-old, I grew up in a weird time period between trilogies. I guess Revenge of the Sith ends in 2005. 10 years later is The Force Awakens, and I'm sort of in between. And in between is obviously the Clone Wars, which I did grow up watching. But from what I remember, the earliest memories, I guess, of Star Wars, it's getting all the movies for Christmas. And actually, I got all the movies except for Revenge of the Sith because it's PG-13. From what I don't remember it, but from what my parents tell me all the time, because it's funny now because I'm a Star Wars YouTuber, uh, they said go around going, I got episode one, episode two, not three, episode four, episode five, and episode six because it was PG-13. So I was actually held back from the greatest Star Wars movie of all time for a long time.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, growing up, I was obsessed with Star Wars as most kids are. But honestly, it never really came back to be this big thing in my life until Star Wars Rebels season 4. And actually, I didn't even watch the first 3 seasons as they aired on television. I sort of binge watched them before I guess binge watching was really a thing. And I binge watched them up until season 4. And then actually I realized that the fourth season was being released at that time. So I watched the last couple episodes as they aired week to week, and it was pretty awesome. I'm a huge Star Wars Rebels fan, but that sort of reinvigorated my love for the fandom. And of course, I watched the sequels in the movies and all that. And then of course, The Mandalorian kicks it off on Disney Plus. So to start the channel, it was around 2020. Yeah, I think it was 2020. The end of 2020, I think, November or December was when I started the channel. And for maybe a year or two, I didn't really take it seriously. I didn't really post much. I didn't do too much until about 2022-ish, probably around, I would guess, Kenobi,
Mhm.
maybe going into Andor. Yeah, probably Andor is when I started live streaming. So Andor, and then everything after that. So that's sort of when I started taking it seriously, making the shorts, doing the live streams, all that stuff. I didn't know what I was doing, but I figured it out as we went, and that's where we ended up here today. So it's been technically about 4 years, give or take a few months, but it's a blast. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
that's
Getting to talk
awesome.
about Star Wars all day long, you
Yeah.
can't beat it.
No, it's phenomenal, and I really do enjoy watching the lives and all the shorts that you do, which is pretty cool. So was it during COVID that you sort of started, or a little bit towards the end of COVID, I'm guessing?
Yeah, it was late 2020, so obviously COVID sort of happened at the beginning of 2020. Honestly, it wasn't really that much of just a situation of boredom. Like it wasn't really what it was. It wasn't because of the pandemic or anything like that. It was more so just actually, funnily enough, it was more so because everybody got sick of me talking about Star Wars. At the time, 2020, it was Mando season two. So Mando season two was coming out, and I just had to talk about it. I had to talk about it to everybody I knew, my friends, my family, my parents, everybody who was around me. I'd talk Star Wars all day long, especially because it was the Mandalorian season two, and people weren't into Star Wars as much as I was. So I was like, okay, they're getting annoyed by me. How am I supposed to talk about Star Wars when they just don't want to? And I was like, well, there's millions of people online that would gladly listen to me talk about Star Wars. And even if they don't, then I can talk to a blank wall and get my sort of venting out about the Star Wars episodes. So that's sort of how it came to be. People being annoyed with me for talking about Star Wars.
Well, and I definitely can relate to that, and that's sort of how I started this. Not just it's a passion of mine,
Yeah.
and I love talking about it. And I was like, what can I do, or who can I talk to? And geez, I'll get online. There's already, as we both know, there's hundreds of podcasts and Star
Yeah.
Wars stuff out there. But it's like, what can I do to show my love and talk about, Mando and Skeleton Crew and all these, the Clone Wars and the prequels, and how can I get out there and talk to people about this and have them, people that appreciate it as much as I do. And then I started, with some interviews with some people and stuff, which was cool. But then as I started to talk, for at least for me, I mean, you do a great job, but for me, just sitting here talking, I didn't know if it would be, as entertaining. So I called up my buddy Nick, and we were talking, and I said I had him on as a guest, and I was like, afterwards, I was like, dude, why don't you come on as a co-host? Because he has a lot more of the lore. As much of an OG as I am, and I've seen all of the movies in the theater the opening day, all 11 major films, which I feel is a pretty cool accomplishment.
That is
But
awesome.
he's read a lot more of the book. So, and we actually met at a celebration through a mutual friend, and we're both here in town. And I was just like, come on in, and we can you can co-host this with me, and we can go back and forth. And if something I don't know or you don't know, we can, sort of hit it off of each other. It's been really cool to get on like yourself and just talk with people, talk about Star Wars, and have a positive aspect on this, because some of this stuff, as we know, is just it gets a little negative sometimes. So we keep it positive here, like you do, and just talk about Star Wars.
And I think Ron and I share an agreement here that the Star Wars world and community, especially online, is better with you in it, Mike. Is much better with you in it. So thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you for that. That is very, very nice. Yeah, that was another reason. Obviously, I saw all the negativity in the Star Wars fandom, which there is a lot of. But there's so many positive Star Wars fans out there that almost just didn't have like a platform to just talk and have fun and just hang out and talk Star Wars where they wouldn't just be crapped on all the time. So that's sort of what I was trying to create, and it took a long time, but I like to think that I succeeded in that goal. Yeah, I mean, it's going back to what Ron was saying, sitting here talking to myself. It took me a while to sort of get into the groove of that. Going off of a co-host almost seemed very nice at some point, but I never really had anybody to do that at the time, and I liked to talk to myself, I guess, because during the early live streams there was nobody there, so I was just talking to myself. And then when the chat showed up, I guess they sort of filtered in slowly over time. Then I had people to sort of bounce off of and ask questions to and all that stuff. And that was sort of really fun. And so now I go on podcasts like you guys and great other content creators like yourselves. And I love to just talk. But sometimes I honestly, and you guys can just say, Mike, shut up, because I find myself talking too much because for 2 hours I got to fill the void of just blank noise. So I just ramble on for long periods of time.
Well, but I think that's the good thing about it, and
Yeah,
we're able to talk about it. The scrolling and the people on there, throwing up the comments and talking about, what's going to happen in Ahsoka season two,
yeah,
what's going to go on in Andor, everything that's coming out right now with all these, new live action things and some of the stuff that we have coming up. It's fun to also be like, okay, what is this? Is this going to happen? Here's a leak here. Talking yesterday, and I don't know if you got into it on your podcast. I feel that this whole leak with Mandalorian and Grogu, I'm like, is it just sort of to give us something to chew on for a little bit? It's taking from that Clone Wars movie, pretty much the exact same thing, maybe with a different villain,
yeah.
but I find it hard to believe that Dave is going to do that.
One thing I'm gonna put out there right now for people that are listening who may not have seen the leak. Let's explain the leak real quick. Are you talking about the hut
Yeah,
situation? Yeah.
I,
yeah,
I can do it very quickly if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
that'd be great.
Okay, so the leak is pretty simple, actually. It's the main villain of the movie is going to be Embo, the bounty hunter from the Clone Wars. He's pretty badass, I will give it that. But is he a main villain material for a Mando movie? Probably not. Rada the Hutt, aka Stinky the Hutt, is back.
Yeah.
And not only that, he's not a baby anymore like he was in the Clone Wars, but the new rumor or leak is that from Bespin Bulletin is that he is going to be playing a gladiator like Hulk from Ragnarok with a vibroblade. So the sort of gist of the leak is that Embo is bounty hunting, as per usual, hired by the twin Hutts from the Book of Boba Fett, and he's going to be hunting down Rada the Hutt, Stinky the Hutt, and Din Djarin and Grogu, I guess. Their mission is to get him back. Sounds very similar to the Clone Wars arc of the Clone
Yeah.
Wars movie. Does not sound like a good movie to me. However,
Yeah.
I don't think that's at all what's going on. Maybe that is part of the movie, but I find it very hard to believe that that will be the main plot of the film when you've set up Grand Admiral Thrawn and you've set up this incredible story for the last 6 years.
Hmm.
But that's just me.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with. I think Dave is not going to do that again. He knows that, and I agree with you. I think he'd be a cool villain, cool enemy for a little bit. But again, we have Thrawn coming up here. We have all this Ahsoka stuff. They're supposed to tie everything into this movie, the Mando verse.
Yes.
So I think that that could be like a here. It's a little piece for you to figure out, or it's just bullshit, and we're gonna throw it out there to leak so that
Yeah.
you guys talk about this and maybe go in a different direction. That's my
That is
thoughts on it.
that is something that our community seems to be good at, is getting our hopes up about random stories that come up over the years and theories and stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree with you guys. I don't think that's what's going to happen. Doesn't sound like a great uh, idea to me, but I don't think I don't think, when does it come out, in 26?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we'll get a little more clarity, even with not even like overt leaks, but little tidbits seem to come out when they're finally actually producing the movie. I think we'll get a little more clarity, and I would like to believe that we, much like some of the other properties like Andor and even Rogue One or many of these other things that came out where people didn't, or Skeleton Crew is a great example, people didn't really know what to expect.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that that is where it goes, where we're not really anticipating how it ties in, if it ties in, any of that kind of stuff, all these shows together. So that's what I'm looking forward to, is at least the notion that we're all going to be wrong. But
Yeah, like the obvious thing is they're never going to allow the entire plot to leak out of this movie. Like it would just never happen. So
right.
this is sort of I think just a lot of smoke just to distract people from what maybe is really going on. Or maybe it is a part of the movie, but it's not like the main part. I brought up this idea that you look at Return of the Jedi. The first half hour of Return of the Jedi is saving Han from Jabba, killing Jabba, the Sarlacc pit, killing Boba Fett, all that stuff. But the real plot of the movie is the Death Star 2. It's Palpatine, it's
Yeah.
Vader's redemption, it's Endor, it's the Battle of Endor, it's all that stuff. So yes, it's the beginning of the movie, and it's a big part of the movie, but it's not like the main plot. Obviously, Jabba's not the main villain of the movie.
Mhm.
Boba Fett's not even either. So maybe it's something that's the first half hour of the movie. Like Din
Yeah.
Djarin and Grogu are on a mission to go save Rada the Hutt, who got captured by Embo, and that's where we start in the action. Like that's the fun sort of start of the movie. And maybe I could see that, but there's no way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
there's no way that it's like not going to involve Thrawn. Like that's
Yeah.
just I
Yeah.
can't see a world where that doesn't happen. And I will say everything other than these leaks has been combative of that. Like you have uh the teaser trailer that was shown at D23 in August that had nothing to resemble these leaks. It had snow troopers, it had AT-AT walkers, it had a snow planet that looked like Hoth, it had Zeb Orrelios and a Razor Crest. It had some pretty cool stuff.
Mhm.
And that has nothing to do with Embo or Rod of the Hutt. And you have the other character that's coming in is one of the Shadow Council members is confirmed to be in the
Yep.
movie. He's one of the Shadow Council members from Mando season 3. Again, the Empire or the remnant of the Empire, connections to Thrawn, all that stuff. Nothing to do with Rada and Embo. So I
Right.
don't know.
I think we kind of maybe have all forgotten with these long form series of how a movie works.
Yeah.
Yeah. How you
Yeah.
can do all that and be done with it in a very short amount of time in a movie. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Well, and I think just to turn a little bit towards Skeleton Crew, we both enjoyed it. I know you did as well. I
Yeah.
thought it was really done very well. I was a little bit. I love the ending, but I was hoping, maybe they would give us a little bit to go into, like you were talking about,
Yeah.
Mando and Grogu come in,
Yeah.
or Hera, or somebody at the end to say, okay, hey, this is what we're going to do. Now we know that there's possibly going to be some of the people from Skeleton Crew in the movie. We don't
Yeah.
know where or when or how much they're going to be in there, but I think it would have been really cool for them to sort of tie it in there.
It would have been even a nice reminder of like this is where we are. Remember, this is kind of like
Yes.
where we're in this Mandoverse thing. We're gonna familiarize the audience with and end with one of these characters coming through. Remember what's coming up. That would have been nice. But sorry to interrupt you, Ron.
No, no, that's all good, and that's what it is, and I think it's still going to be a fantastic movie. And Mike, I think you're right. I think that's what it could be. It could be a little section, maybe start it off, boom, let's go, the action, and like you were saying, how are we going to fit a new bounty or a saved Jabba style of a hut and put it in this ship?
Yeah, yeah, the M1 Starfighter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're not going to put it in that starfighter.
That's true. Yeah.
So, but I'm hopeful with Ahsoka, just some of the things that we've heard coming out. Obviously, Andor in the next couple months here is going to be phenomenal. There's not anybody, I don't think, in the Star Wars universe that isn't excited about that as much
Yeah.
crap as they're given to some of these other things that are coming out. I feel like that Andor is just going to be phenomenal, and we're going to see Krennic again.
Yeah.
So many cool characters in reference to that. Give us a little bit of thoughts on that from your side on Andor.
So Andor season two, I think is going to be. I think I've been saying this since it sort of got announced. I guess is going to be better than Andor season one. Now here's the deal: a lot of people almost like misremember what happened with Andor season one because now I feel like it seems to be more loved in the Star Wars fandom. When it was coming out, that wasn't really the case. Like you had people crapping on the show, calling it and bore, complaining about this, complaining about that. There's no lightsabers, there's no force. Like it wasn't really a cohesive Star Wars fandom that was like
There's Philip Screws in it.
exactly like yeah, breaks and screws. Yeah. Uh it was really not like everybody was together. It didn't feel like Skeleton Crew. Let's put it that way. Skeleton Crew is the last thing we watched. I feel like everybody who was watching that loved it. Even the ending, like you just mentioned, not showing Thrawn, not showing Din and Grogu, still didn't hurt the show.
Right.
But Andor season one, it did have that sort of feeling, and so did everything that came out that year or the year before. Book of Boba Fett, Kenobi, Andor, they all had the same. It was very, very, very divided, and people had their Book of Beta Fett or like that's that kind of stuff, and Bor giving him stupid names like that. But having said that, when people sort of got to digest Andor as a full 12 episode arc instead of just the first three or just the first six or whatever, they kind of realized that this stuff's good. And that Andor first season's really, really good. And I can't wait for the second one. Like you said, Krennic's going to be in it, K2SO is going to be in it. And I'm sure there's a lot more coming. They wouldn't just announce those two and it be it. So I'd guess you'd see probably some more familiar faces from Rogue One, maybe a Vader, probably not. More likely like a Palpatine in the Senate building or something, but like a Bail Organa probably, or I don't even know. Regardless of the big cameos, because season one didn't really have them either. I think it's going to tell a great story because it tracks over 4 years. So
Right.
like the first season was one, and this is now four. So you're hitting really the big points. And I mentioned this on my live stream yesterday actually because I just rewatched the beginning of Rogue One because Diego Luna plays Cassian said that the opening scene of Rogue One, where he's walking down the alleyway, is pretty much where Andor season two ends. So it goes right into it. And I was watching back that scene where he meets the guy in the alleyway who has a hurt arm, or maybe just has one arm, I forget. But he's talking to him about the pilot that has gone rogue, who's talking about Galen Erso. So one, Cassian knows who Galen Erso is, which is
Yeah.
pretty important.
Those
That
types of defector.
exactly. It might mean that Galen's going to be in season two, maybe. I don't know. Or at least he finds out about Galen and that he's in charge of building something because he doesn't really know about the Death Star because the guy with the one arm tells him about this planet killing weapon. Uh, and then he's a cold blooded killer. He kills the guy with one arm because he can't escape the Empire in the opening scene. So immediately, like, okay, this guy means business. He's a rebel. He's a badass. But Andor, at the end of season one, he's not really like that. Yes, he's killed a few people almost by accident in Andor season one,
Yeah,
but he's
not
not
yet.
like the cold-blooded killer that we see in Rogue One. So I think Andor season two has the possibility, and I actually think it will, but it has the possibility to be a lot better than season one and be the perfect sort of middle piece to complete the story of Andor 2, and Rogue One.
Mhm.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think it's going to be, and I love that they're doing that, like you said, the yearly, what is it, three
Yeah.
or four episodes per year, where they're just going to hit on these major points. We're probably just like in Rogue One, it's like don't get your hopes up for any of these characters because you're not
Yeah.
going to see them again. I think
Yeah.
the same thing's going to happen with Lucen and Bix and stuff like that, where we're not going to see some of these people again, or something's going to happen to them, whether they die or whatever happens. We're
Yeah.
not going to see these people again. Obviously, they're not in the Star Wars universe, and that's what I love about the story, especially this one. And the Rogue One, where they're bringing these characters in that people loved. I mean, Rogue One is some Star Wars fans' favorite movie.
Mhm.
Which
Yeah.
I think is incredible. You're bringing these characters in that nobody knew anything about, and they're bringing them to life, just like with Ahsoka. I mean, she
Yeah.
has become one of my favorite characters,
Yeah.
and I think it's really great that they're doing that with Andor. There's not a Skywalker in it. There's not lightsabers, but it's still entertaining and it's still holding us on the edge of our seat and what's going to happen next.
Mhm.
I thought they did a great job.
Yeah, and it really doesn't need that. Going back to what Nick said earlier, how Skeleton Crew, you almost wanted them to sort of explain where it stood in the Star Wars timeline, like give us something to sort of show us this is in the Mandoverse. Mando and Grogu are here, or Thrawn is here, so it ties to Ahsoka. I think they've done a really good job with these shows. Like you said, you don't need a Skywalker. Look at Mando season one. Look at Ahsoka season one. Look at Skeleton Crew, hopefully season one of multiple, but we'll see. Season one, Andor season one. All those seasons, they all have one thing in common, and that is no cameos.
Right.
Mando season two, yes. I mean, Luke, Bo-Katan, Ahsoka, you
Yeah.
name it. But season one, nobody. Skeleton Crew season one, nobody. And we thought they would show up, but never did.
Mhm.
Same with Andor, never did. Like even during Andor season one being released, we were like, oh, could this person show up? Could that person show up? Nope, never. And it honestly makes sense the way they do it because you're not, if the real goal is to, with the Mandoverse at least, to make a maybe Mando trilogy or at least some Mando movies, then your real goal is to get to that point where you're having a good enough story to tell in a movie. And that's sort of the end of the empire. That's what we're talking about with Thrawn and stuff. And that's why we think for sure he'll be in the Mandalorian and Grogu. But
Mhm.
with Skeleton Crew, you've now established all these characters, these four kids, Jod, and the whole pirate sort of realm. But I think the biggest thing is at in itself.
Right.
But you established all these things, so now when they show up somewhere else, you have that prior knowledge. And for people who don't have the prior knowledge, they'll go, "What is this planet? Who are these guys?" With Jude Law's in Star Wars, then they can go back and watch it.
Mhm.
It's the same thing with Andor and with the Mandalorian. They almost did it sort of in the wrong order with Andor because Rogue One came out first.
Mhm.
But it's the same thing. You watch Andor, you're like, I want more of this guy. Oh, well, here he is dying to the Death Star in Rogue One. So it's the same thing with the Mandalorian. Mandalorian doesn't need any cameos in that first season because it's such a good story on its own. You get introduced to great characters like Din Djarin and Grogu and Grief Karga and Mon Mothma, Mon Mothma, Moff Gideon, Jesus. Uh, and you get introduced to all those characters for them to have great stories down the line. Yes, you can then introduce characters like Luke and Ahsoka and
Right.
really bring them into the larger Star Wars story. But I think the first seasons of all these shows moving forward are just going to be that establishing these characters in Star Wars to tell further stories later down the line. And I think that's what Skeleton Crew did so well, so that when we see Jod somewhere else in this Mandoverse, it'll be so much better than just introducing him in the movie for the first time. It's because now you have this whole backstory of this awesome character.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to echo what you're saying, I think also in all those first seasons, if there was ever a name drop or maybe even like a half cameo, anything that would be maybe considered an Easter egg or something that familiarizes people, it was very intentional and purposeful for the story they were telling,
Yeah.
rather than just being like, here they are, and
Yeah.
the one that comes to mind in Andor is Saw Gerrera. So like that was
Yes.
actually very vital to show kind of where the rebellion is at. We see him in Rogue One, obviously, and they have opinions on him, but I think it actually really helped to have his cameo in, not that he's like this huge cameo, but to all of us, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, now we got Saw Gerrera. But it was necessary for the story they were telling. It wasn't just here's Saw Gerrera, he blows something up. You
Yeah.
never see him do anything. He's just, it's just a familiarized thing to give you a look at where we're at in the formation of the Rebel Alliance. And I'm sure there are other examples, maybe Easter eggs in Mandalorian season one or different things, but I like that they don't just overtly throw things into that first season just to do it. I feel like maybe season three Mando got a little bit that way, but at that point we already had all this story established and it was just fun.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Well, going off of that, I'll give you an example because you were looking for one from Mando season one. You have Fennec Shand dying or getting shot on Tatooine, and you hear Boba Fett's footsteps walk towards her, but you don't see
yeah,
him.
Right.
You don't do like it's purposeful for the story. But that brings up the conversation of fan service, and I'm very interested to hear your guys' take on this because I hear fan service all the time, like it's a bad thing. Like fan service is just, oh, you're just throwing that in there for fan service. Luke Skywalker in The Mandalorian season two is just fan service, fan service, fan service. Like it's a bad thing. I actually don't think fan service is a bad thing if done correctly
yeah,
because like you said, it has to have a purpose in the story. So although the Mandalorian season one doesn't have any cameos and the Mandalorian season two is loaded with cameos, it doesn't make the Mandalorian season two worse or better.
right.
It's purposeful to the story. Every single one. Bo-Katan is necessary because Din's looking for other Mandalorians. Ahsoka is necessary because he's looking for a Jedi. Goes and sits on seeing someone on Titan, which calls to Luke Skywalker. It's all a part of the story, and
Mhm.
it works, but it's still technically fan service. So I'm interested to hear what you guys think. Like if you go into Andor season two, which is the next project, and you see like Vader and Palpatine and all these characters, is that just fan service or
Lucasfilm, service me, please. uh
Take it.
yeah,
I'll go next. Yeah.
I think I get the point of the argument. I don't think what made, for example, Mandalorian season two great is just that Luke showed up and kicked ass. I think
yeah,
it was the build up and the anticipation and the journey the characters took and that the story took that made that a lot more significant than just him showing up. Similar argument to any of the stories in the movies where you're expecting a character to show up and kick ass and it happens a different way. I think that would be fan service, but I, I think it makes sense. We're in this universe with all these really important players, and you have to see the relationship of the story you're watching to the story that you know. And to your point, if it's necessary to tell that in a better way or in a more significant way, then you kind of have to have it. And I don't think it's a bad thing at all. In some properties, you have to have it. For example, Obi-Wan Kenobi had to have very
yeah,
significant characters and topics and all that kind of stuff. I feel like the cameos made the Mandalorian kind of come to life and be a much larger part of the Star Wars universe in a way that maybe otherwise wouldn't have. And not that Skeleton Crew did not feel like it was in the Star Wars universe to me, but I wouldn't have been paying attention probably as much to the Ad-Atten situation or you know, the characters itself if we were constantly being reminded this is how it plays into the bigger picture. So I think it's a good thing later on then to tie them in, and I don't think it's a negative thing at all to do fan service. I only think it's a negative thing if that's all you get. So if
yeah,
you, and I don't necessarily know if that's happened yet, but if you get into a story and what made it good is because you saw Ahsoka and that's it. Nothing else really happened. Then
yeah,
I would call it fan service. But to be quite honest, I don't think that's happened yet. Because even the
yeah,
N1 Starfighter in season three of Mandalorian got a bunch of heat for fan service. But man, we're 3 seasons into a show. His ship better be cool if he's gonna get
yeah,
it. It's like I don't think that was a big deal at all. And I might be rambling now, but I'm all for it. When I hear that, you know, Ahsoka season two is gonna have some cameos of some of my most precious memoried characters. I'm all for it because now it makes sense. It probably would have been weird if in the first ever episode of Ahsoka we get a flashback of Hayden Christensen, Ewan McGregor, Natalie Portman, all,
Yeah.
and we're not in the story, but that's not what happened. So service me, please, Lucasfilm. I would
Yeah.
love it. But
Yeah, and I feel the same with both of you guys. I think it's cool to look at Rogue One with Darth Vader.
Yeah.
You know, what an amazing both scenes. What amazing scenes they had with him. And I feel that for me being the OG, anything that you can do, and these Easter eggs for me are phenomenal. I love anything that's going to bring me back to when I was 10 years old, sitting in that theater in 1977, watching Star Wars for the first time, or Return of the Jedi. Even as we've talked about 7, 8, and 9 weren't my favorite, but to see the Death Star crumbled on the planet with the Emperor's chair and things like
Yeah.
that. That was just so cool for me. So, yes, give me some of that stuff, throw it in there. I think fan service is good. We're fans. We do want to see some of that stuff.
Yeah.
So I think it's good that when we do get it, it's quality stuff. And like Nick said, I don't think we've had anything that was overdone or too much, but I did like the whole setup, like you said, with Fennec Shan, and you're like, oh, who is that walking up there?
Yeah.
This is cool,
Mhm.
and they leave us into the cliffhangers for the next episode or the
Yeah.
next season, which I think is fantastic.
Mike, what's your take on fan service?
Well, here's the deal. I like fan service. Obviously, you almost need it in Star Wars, but like you were saying, Nick, actually, and it was a great point, was if there was random characters just thrown in Skeleton Crew, you wouldn't be paying attention to what's important. And I think that at Atten obviously is clearly important, but it will be more important moving forward because there's so much credits there. They can print credits. So kind of whoever controls that planet controls the upcoming war. So if like Thrawn gets his hands on it, or so many people have been asking, how does the First Order rise to power? Where the hell did they come from? Where did Snoke come from? And all that. How'd they get so much power so quickly? Well, maybe that's the answer. Maybe they had these credits or the ability to print credits on Atten.
Mhm.
So like if you just threw in Thrawn and you threw in Mando and Grogu, the conversation would be about them instead of what's really important in that show. So yeah, fan service, it's not a bad thing. It can be a bad thing, maybe sometimes, but I look at it like this. I I can't find an example in Star Wars. I've been racking my in my head about it, but I can't do it in where it's bad. Like it's not purposeful or for the story. Like as long as it's for the story, that's literally all that matters. You can bring in anybody or anything, and it will make sense. I actually think Lucasfilm does such a good job at not overdoing it. They have chances now where they can give us just so much fan service and it would be too much almost to an extent. I think of like Luke and Han and Leia in this Mandoverse. We've had 3 seasons of Mando, a season of Book of Boba Fett, a season of Ahsoka, a season of Skeleton Crew. That's 6 seasons of television. We've seen Luke twice,
Mhm.
Leia and Han 0 times. Like we've had chances to see them, especially in Ahsoka when she sends C3PO for her. Like we've had chances to see them, but we just haven't. And I think because they're trying to not make it just fan service. When they show up, it's important.
Mhm.
And like when Luke showed up, it's important. And when he shows up in the Book of Boba Fett, it's very important. So I think they've done a really good job with fan service, just not sort of giving it for fan service sake. I don't know. When you look at other properties like Marvel, for example, they do it well too. I love Kevin Feige, but like you look at Multiverse of Madness, I guess is the best example because you had that John Krasinski as Reed Richards because fans wanted it to happen. You brought back Patrick Stewart as Professor X because fans wanted that to happen. Like you have these examples of X-Men, Deadpool and Wolverine. You brought back all you brought back Blade. You brought in Channing Tatum as like that's fan service,
Yeah.
but it still works. Like you want to serve the fans. These are people who paying to come see the movies, paying to come watch the shows. Obviously, you want to serve them. So it really boggles my mind that people are calling fan service a bad thing. Like I just don't get it. Do you not want to see the characters that you know and love do cool things? Like I don't know.
Well, that's a great point. Like Ron and I loved Hayden Christensen in Ahsoka season one.
Yes.
Would that have happened had the prequels and Hayden Christensen not had a bit of a renaissance in the last 3 or 4 years with the fans who are now saying, wait a minute, he got a bad rap by all these people who, were dogging the movies at the time when they came out. And then we all, this huge, like, embraceful moment, we were there for it in 2022 at Celebration,
Yeah.
Ron, where, it was like, we all love you. I don't know if you knew that for the past 15 years, but we
Yeah.
all love you. And now, we're kind of almost expecting him in a lot of projects now, but that's,
Yeah.
that's like good fan service in my opinion. I wouldn't even call it fan service if the term fan service has a negative connotation. So,
Yeah, and actually going back to what you're talking about bringing prequel characters back, they
mhm.
brought Ahmed Best back to
Yes.
Yeah,
see
So good.
Kelleran Beck
So
yeah,
in
good.
Mando season 3. And here's the deal: like I said, not overdoing it. You could have had anybody under the
any person.
sun
Yeah,
save Grogu, like anybody. You could have brought back Mace Windu from the dead, and fans would have been like, "Yeah,"
yeah,
but they didn't do that. They went with a character that's so obscure and yet fans loved it because you brought back Ahmed Best. People knew what happened with him. They knew what happened with Jar Jar and that whole situation. And it was just a feel good moment for Star Wars fans, feel good moment for Ahmed and all that stuff. And for the Star Wars community, it was great. But you could have done something crazy like fan service, like have, I don't know, Anakin save Grogu and show that Anakin had some sort of doubt or something. I don't know,
yeah,
anything crazy like that.
Right.
yeah,
But you didn't. You got Kelleran Beck, a random character that was from a TV game show, and brought him in to save Grogu. Now, obviously, where does he go from there? Well, we have no idea. This goes off in a Naboo starfighter or star
yeah.
cruiser.
He does. Yeah,
So, but like that's the example of they're so good with this. Like they know what they're doing over there, and they really, really do. And I get some backlash when I say stuff like that. Like Lucasfilm really knows what they're doing. They know how to keep a secret. They know all this stuff. Like you got to trust them because they know what they're doing. And people are like, oh, what about the sequel trilogy? What about? And obviously, I think some people clearly love the sequels. That's without a
yeah,
doubt something that's real. And they made billions upon billions of dollars. But it's almost like they've learned their lesson from the sequel trilogy. They haven't released a movie in 6 years.
yeah,
They clearly learned their lesson from Solo and The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker that something was wrong there. So let's step back, rework, come back with something that works. And that's the Mandalorian Grogu movie. But that only came because they took a step back and they were like, we're going to focus on shows. We're going to make great shows. And they made great shows.
mhm,
So I have no doubt in my mind that with every fiber in my being, I trust Lucasfilm to do the right thing because they do the right thing time and time and time again, like bringing in Kelleran Beck to save Grogu instead of just doing something random that would just serve the fans.
yeah,
So, yeah.
No, yeah, I totally agree. And with like you were talking about with Solo, it just got such a bad rap, and it's such a good movie.
Yeah, it's crazy.
We love all of it. And for me, that was one of my favorites. I got to see Han meet Chewie, even though I knew all this stuff
Yeah.
already and how he got his surname, but seeing it on the big screen, being able to watch it and just enjoy it and laugh about it or whatever it was, the feelings that I had for that movie was just incredible. And when all of a sudden people were like, "Oh, this was this and that, and it was terrible," or "They should have done this," and I was like, "No, they did such a good job with that." And same with Kenobi.
yeah,
Out of all the live action, I love them all. Kenobi's my favorite. I
Really?
love how they brought Leia in
Yeah.
instead of Luke. We all thought it was going to be Luke. I
Yeah.
think for the most part, everybody thought, okay, there's going to be Luke in there. He's going to do
Yeah.
something on Tatooine with it. When Leia was brought into it, I thought that was such a great job.
That
You
was.
know, and everybody concentrates on Reva, whatever. It's like, okay, you got to bring somebody in there. You got to bring a little bit of an antagonist in there.
Yeah.
But then when they brought Vader in and those last few episodes, it was just like, we were talking about. It's just like, where's the Kleenex? This is
Yeah.
amazing. And you see Vader as this brutal, let me just take this kid and these adults and just snap their necks as I walk through, and I'm just this, thing. And it just, yeah, you're right. They've just done such a good job. Same with Boba Fett. Everybody was chewing up Boba Fett. I loved it as well. It took me 30 years to see him climb out of the Sarlacc pit with that arm.
Yeah.
It was just so
yeah,
amazing. Now, yeah, would I've loved to seen some bounty hunters instead of these kids on these little green and blue and red bikes?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure, but they did a fantastic job
yeah.
with all of this stuff.
How dare they make him a human being?
Exactly. So I went on this crazy rant.
That's
Yes,
yesterday, right? Yeah.
yesterday. Yes, I went on this crazy rant. The Book of Boba Fett is so misunderstood as a show, as a premise at all. Yes, Boba Fett has been so idolized in people's minds to the point where people literally anything that we gave them that wasn't just Boba Fett smashing skulls would have been a disaster.
Yeah.
And they don't understand, or some people just don't understand. He died or almost died and had a near death experience, crawled his way out of the Sarlacc pit, spent 5 years on Tatooine with these Tusken Raiders, learning to become a family, learning to do all this stuff with them, appreciating Tatooine for what it is, wanting to protect these Tuskens, and they all die. They all die to the Hutts or the
Brutally.
Pikes or whoever, and he's not there to save them. So his one goal is to first of all kill the people who killed his new family, and then rule over Tatooine and protect the people who still stay there. So people just for some reason can't see the arc that happened through the first 4.5 episodes of that show. Like they just for some reason refuse to see it. That Boba Fett is obviously a different version of the character because he died. He pretty much died. It went through a whole 5 year life changing experience. Obviously, you're going to be different. That's my whole Boba Fett spiel. Yeah, I could go on for days about Boba Fett. It's crazy. I feel like if everybody together just went back and watched Boba Fett again, they would be like, "Oh yeah, I forgot how good this show was." Like everybody would say the same thing, and I've done that myself. I forgot how good it was. I went back and watched it like a year ago, and it was extraordinary.
Well, therein lies one of the problems, though, is that I think what we're battling here, and it's okay, but because it just is what it is. But I think what we're battling here is a lot of people going into it with the intention of watching it to pick it apart and not
Yes.
really paying attention to those arcs you're talking about, not really paying attention to what's actually going on and not giving it the credit that is there and having the intention of watching it to react and
Yes.
cause a stir, which, I'm appreciating the fact that you're ranting about it right now or yesterday because it's needed,
Yeah.
because there's exponential rants about how like you're listening to people who clearly didn't pay attention during the show
Yeah.
talk about this show. And that's why I say, how dare they humanize him and make him a person? Because
Yeah.
up until that point, what do you have? The only things you ever saw about Boba Fett were you watched him watch his dad get decapitated. You see him get basically like pulled around by brutal bounty hunters in the Clone Wars. And then you see him, do his thing in the originals. And maybe if you read some comics and stuff, he's a badass and stuff. But at that point, you see him go through what you said was like as traumatic of an experience as you can. And he came out the other side still a badass,
Yeah.
but not cold and evil anymore.
Exactly.
And he was understandably cold and evil before. So
Yeah.
anyway.
No,
Well,
it
I
is
think, yeah.
crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And I'm actually rewatching the Clone Wars. I'm watching it with my girlfriend who it's her first time watching through, and that's really cool because like we just watched the episode with or the episodes with Clone 99,
Mhm.
and I go, "Oh, you're gonna love Clone 99." Kind of mean, but she was like, "Oh, he's so sweet," because like he's obviously the old clone who
Mhm.
doesn't get to be a clone, and then he dies. And she's like, "How could you tell me that?" But right around that same time, I believe a couple arcs before that is Boba Fett, and he tries to kill Mace.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
wants revenge for his dad. But
Mhm.
throughout that entire arc, the only person he wants to kill is Mace, and he won't even do it himself. And
Yeah.
when he almost gets caught, he has the chance to kill two clone cadets. He won't do it. He has the chance to kill two people they take hostage. He won't do it. Like it's just the bounty hunters forcing him to do these bad things. So even in the Clone Wars from a decade ago, he's still not like this fully evil dude that's gonna be the Boba Fett that you don't see in the book of Boba Fett. Like it's the same guy still. It's
Yeah.
just he went through some traumatic stuff with his dad getting his head chopped off, and obviously he was trained by bounty hunters. So it's almost a similar situation as Jod.
Yeah.
Jod, it's the circumstances he was given. He had to fight his whole life to just get a meal, and like everything he saw was bad. And we learned in the last episode of Skeleton Crew that the Jedi who found him was running from Order 66 or running from the Empire, and was he, as he puts it, as raggedy and whatever as I was, as I lived in a hole in the ground. And then I watched as they killed her in front of me. So it's his experience that went through that makes him the way that he is. But even in the finale, when he has Fern and her mom as a hostage and all this stuff, and has the chance to kill all of them at one point, like every single one of them could have chopped their heads off, could have shot him with a blaster, but he hesitates every time. And he continues to say, I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't need to hurt anybody. Nobody needs to get hurt. Nobody needs to die. All that stuff. Because deep down, like Boba Fett, he's probably a good guy. And then it's just the circumstances that he's been dealt, and that's what makes a good character. That's what makes an
Yeah.
interesting character. You don't just want you can have him like a Palpatine that's just straight evil all the time, but even he's complex because he's working both sides of the war. He's the leader
Right.
of the Separatists, leader of the whatever. But to have a character that's evil but also has a good side to him, that's called good character development.
Absolutely.
And I don't know what, but like Nick said, people just go in with the mindset of I'm going to hate this before they even watch it. And that's a big problem that Star Wars has. I don't know how you fix it because they really can't. But the biggest issue of it is people make money off of that. People
Yeah.
make so much money off of crapping on Star Wars. And I don't know how you fix it. Again, I don't know how. And I don't know if you should because I guess I make money off of being positive about Star Wars. So, but it is a problem. It's definitely a problem because if somebody's not going to have food on the table because they don't make money, then they're going to crap on Star Wars, whether it's the greatest thing they've ever seen or the worst thing they've ever seen. It's going to be bad in their own minds because they have to crap on it.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, if they have a big enough following, that's going to spread and people are going to agree with them
Yeah.
for one reason or another.
Yeah, and I think a perfect example is is this right here.
Yeah.
Again, I know all three of us loved it.
Yep.
It was phenomenal, and I hated to see the some of the fan reaction about it. Some people in episode 5 started to turn a little bit and come back. Oh, now they're killing people, and we got these lightsaber battles and this and that. But it was just such a phenomenally well done movie. I think again the character development I thought was great because again you know that they're going to answer most of the questions, and that's what they did when they go back and do the scenes beforehand when they're showing that, and I thought they did such a good job with that. And then at the end, for especially people like you and me and Nick, to see Plagueis there, it was like, oh my God,
It was so awesome.
this is amazing.
Yeah.
That I can't wait, and then all of a sudden it was like wah wah.
Well, that will go down. Speaking of fan service, that will probably go down as fan service if Acolyte never gets renewed.
Yeah, true.
But if you're thinking about what they clearly were thinking about when they were making it, is that there's more story to this.
Yeah.
Then that's well placed fans of like saying this is where we're at.
Yeah.
This is where the Sith are at, and this is where the Jedi are at because we see Yoda's little ears perk up,
Yeah.
and that's that fan service we were talking about that would have set that up. I don't think we're not going to get more Acolyte. I think at some point we'll get something in some form. But if we don't, that would be one of those examples of like they just got plugged in there maybe. But even then, it I don't know. I'm probably sidetracking us on
No, no.
Acolyte, but
I actually think the Acolyte, and a lot of people don't even realize it, but the Acolyte pretty much outed a lot of people for not understanding Star Wars or not like knowing what they're talking about.
yeah,
Like one of the biggest complaints of the entire show was the witches and how they're lesbians. What are we talking about here?
Yeah.
Witches in Star Wars have always been girls.
Yeah.
And we're sitting here talking about stupid things because you can't crap on anything else because the show's spectacular. I don't know what the argument, like what goes through somebody's mind. And it proves that they don't even understand Star Wars or they haven't watched Star Wars before when they say something like that, when witches have been around since the Clone Wars and even before that, when they've always been girls and they've always had magic. Like the complaints for the show were so irrational and so just looking for something to complain about. Literally the definition of looking for something to complain about, Kiadi Mundi being there.
Yeah.
The fact that people couldn't tell the difference between legends and canon, which is so crazy. And actually, somebody sent it to my Discord today. I want to see if I can find it. Oh, perfect. It's right here. Nice. So one of my moderators actually found this. It was an interview with George Lucas. Perfect. The guy who created the damn thing. Mm-hmm. The question was, what do you think of the expanded universe of books? And his answer is, the books are a different universe. I have not read any of them. And I told them when they started writing them, I wouldn't read any of the books and I would block out certain. Oh, and they have to block out certain periods. They can't touch where the real story happens. George Lucas, 2003. So right then and there, I mean, it's crazy to me that people latched onto something so small as Mundi can't be alive at this point because his birthday in Legends is 50 years away or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like,
From a
what are we
trading
talking
card.
about? You really want to complain that badly about this show? There's really nothing else that you can find in this series that is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
No.
I think there's also the logical point of view that Ron and I had talked about that I was pretty heated about, which was the whole point of putting Mundi in there was not just fan service. It was a little
Yes.
flag for fans to be like, this conversation right here, these people never going to find out about what happens in this show. It's a little inference flag of good storytelling that you
Yes.
can go back and watch later and be like, oh, if you knew, like you said, if you kind of generally know what's going on in Star Wars, or generally know if you're following a story intentionally, you'd know like, all right, so he's there. And seems like these arguments about whether they know about the Sith and the Phantom Menace or not, that's your answer. They don't, because
Yes.
they don't know what's going on. And I refused to listen to the conversation they were having because I got to my keyboard to talk about why is he here, And
Yes.
so even without you don't even have to really have a huge Star Wars background to know about those little logical leaps about like if this person's here, they're not going to find out about it. And if that person's here, he's probably not going to be here for the rest of the show.
Yeah.
That's just but anyway.
No, absolutely. The Acolyte tells such a delicate story, and it has to balance that line of nobody can find out about this. Nobody can find out that the Sith exist. That's something we know going in. And what
Hmm.
was really funny to me was as the 6, 7 weeks of Acolyte, because there was probably 2 episode premiere, the 7 weeks of Acolyte came out, it was always the conversation of this show will retcon the prequel trilogy. It's going to. It's going to. It's going to. Every week, it's going to. It's going to. It's going to. And then episode 8 comes around and it didn't. And then the conversation went away. The show is trash just for no reason at all. It was going to retcon, but then it didn't.
Yeah.
It's just a ridiculous argument. Like you said, Mundi being in that scene is so important, not because it's Mundi, not because it's fan service, but because he can't find out about this. And that
Yeah.
means Vanessa Rowe, who's standing right there, is going to cover it up. And she
Yeah.
does. And the ending
Exactly.
of that is
Yeah.
so well put. She Soul dies and she frames it all on him. And it's such a great story. It's so well told. It's brand new cast. It's brand new characters that are all so damn good. I mean, Soul is Qui-Gon esque. He's amazing. But my favorite character in the show and one of my favorite characters in Star Wars forever is now Chimere. And
Yeah.
it's not even his name. His name is the Stranger. We don't even know his name, but he's so badass and he's so cool. And to not get more of his story is just a disaster. But from start to finish, that show is so well crafted. It had to literally walk the fence. It had to stay on the line of the Jedi can't find out about the Sith, and the Sith can't find out, or the Sith can find out about the Jedi, but the Sith can't make themselves known to the Jedi.
Mhm.
And everybody in that forest had to die, and they
Yeah.
did.
Yep.
All but Soul, and then he dies a couple episodes later. And Vanessa Rowe covers it all up, which not only is like, why would she do that? But it's because the Jedi, and I think this is another reason why people can't see the greatness that is the Acolyte and can't sort of wrap their heads around this possibility. And that is, people grew up on the prequel trilogy, see the Jedi as the heroes, and they are, obviously. But they're so flawed by the time of the prequel trilogy that they allow Palpatine to rise to power. They allow him to literally a Sith Lord to be the Chancellor of the Republic right next door to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. And they don't notice. They allow the chosen one to fall to the dark side and they don't give a shit. Like the Jedi Order is so corrupted, so bad by the time of the prequel trilogy, but people who love the prequels don't want to see that. They don't want to see that
No.
the reason that Anakin fell is because of those reasons, because the Jedi are corrupted, because the Jedi are bad. They don't want to see it. So the Acolyte tells them that. It explains the story of how that begins.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
it does it so well. And people don't want to hear that. They don't want to see that. Obviously, Plagueis was around.
Yeah.
In his master, in his master's master, in his master's master's master.
Yeah.
Obviously, for the last thousands of years, there were Sith around, but they didn't make themselves known to the Jedi. And that's what the Acolyte does so well. And I don't know where it went wrong. Like,
Yeah.
why do so many people hate this show? I don't get it. I really don't, because they were looking for anything to hate, and maybe it's a conversation we just had about people making money about hating Star Wars, but it didn't happen with Skeleton Crew.
I I'll maybe bring my own opinion of why it got hate, but
Let's hear it.
it's only my guess. And it's more of a big picture thing with I think when you're dealing with, like you said, the Jedi or people's perception of the Jedi or specific characters like legacy characters like Luke or something like that, people get real uptight immediately before they even see it. So
Yeah,
if you're a big prequel person like me, I've seen a lot of big prequel people on the internet preemptively hate the Acolyte
yeah,
because they just assume, like you said, it's going to ruin my favorite movies.
yes,
It's like it's not. If anything, it's probably going to really add some depth to them.
Yeah, good answer.
yeah,
Yeah. And for example, one of my favorite scenes in all of The Acolyte was when they finally, in the last episode, which I have a gripe with, basically waiting to that last episode for this, is bringing in that politician who's like, you know what I think? I think you're all a bunch of losers. And I think
yes,
that one of you is going to snap one day and we're all going to be screwed.
yes. It
And
was
that was
so
like,
good.
that was one of my favorite scenes of the whole thing. We only got like 5 minutes of it.
Yeah,
And that's exactly the type of thing that this show adds depth to the prequels for. And I don't think people want that. I don't think I think it's like I want to see my favorite characters kick ass if they're involved or the stories that lead up to them kick ass. I don't want to see them have to go through something again. And I think
yeah,
that's sort of what where the basis of it is. And then you get into, maybe people make money doing it or people feel smart when they do it, whatever. But I think
yeah,
it's just like, don't touch my thing. And if you come even close to it, unless it's awesome, unless I get to see, all this stuff about the thing that I specifically love, then I don't want it.
yeah.
But even if it's a good story, I don't want anything to do with it.
It's
You know?
honestly it's the same conversation over and over and over again in the history of Star Wars. And a lot of original trilogy fans, and Ron, I know you've of course seen all the movies in theaters, but I know you like the prequels, so it's kind of not you. But a lot of people who went to see The Phantom Menace in 1999 didn't like it because it wasn't the same thing as the original trilogy. It was different.
Mhm.
And what makes it different is what makes it good to an extent. You don't want to see the same story told over again.
Right.
That's almost the exact same complaint that they had with The Force Awakens. It's very
Correct.
similar
Yeah.
to A New Hope. So you have both exaggerations of either side. The Phantom Menace is so different from the original trilogy, and The Force Awakens is very similar to the original trilogy. And they both got crapped on by the Star Wars fandom because they don't know what they want. They don't. And like you said, if it's not what they remember, if it's not what they like, then don't touch it, or at least or I'm not going to like it.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what the Acolyte was. And honestly, going to Kenobi, back to Kenobi, that's what Kenobi was too. I feel like Kenobi had it, it had it, people had it out for Kenobi before it even aired.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, they just were looking for something to complain about. And that's what happened with the Acolyte as well. And it's really a bummer because that show is so good and I want to see more of those characters.
Yes.
Obviously, all of them are dead except for a few, but I want to see a lot of those characters continue.
Yeah.
But it's just crazy to me the amount of hate that that show received before it even aired.
Yeah.
Like, that's what's crazy. And that's what's concerning for future Star Wars projects. Like, what's that going to happen to next? When's it going to happen next? Because it's bound to happen again. So that's sort of the issue.
I think we're on a good roll though with Skeleton Crew and then Andor,
True.
maybe laying a little bit of coolant on the situation. But
Yeah, I agree. But and then again, I go back to we found something to complain about with every show up until
yeah,
Skeleton Crew. Honestly, that's the big props to Skeleton Crew.
yeah,
Is there was no sort of beta fet and bore type thing where people had something to complain about. I feel like maybe because not many people watched it or not as many people watched it, so it wasn't a big enough target for people to crap on. I guess I don't know, but I feel like Skeleton Crew came out unscathed. Like there was really nobody complaining about the show for the most part. But you look at the Acolyte, obviously, and or we talked about Kenobi, Book of Boba Fett. They all it's the same conversation over again. So it'll be interesting when Andor season 2 comes around to see how people view it. It's funny because every once in a while you have so much Star Wars content that not everybody can love everything. So every once in a while I'll post like a deleted scene from Revenge of the
yeah,
Sith or something like that along those lines about Revenge of the Sith. In Revenge of the Sith, I feel it's my favorite movie, but I feel it's a really good movie, and I feel like most people enjoy the movie. But every once in a while, you get a comment like, "This movie, it's like a deleted scene." It'll be like, "Should have deleted this scene and the rest of the movie too. That movie sucks." And I'm like, "Whoa, really? There's people out there that think that." And I think that's just the common occurrence with all Star Wars projects. You're gonna find a group of people that don't like it, and it's whether or not those people scream louder than everybody else or not. And I think that's what made the Acolyte so unique, because there was both sides of people who really loved it or really hated it,
Yeah.
and they were just clashing online, and that's what got the second season canceled. I get it, viewer numbers, I get it, costed a ton to make, but you've watched the show, it should cost a ton to make. It's incredible. Like, the lightsaber duels are awesome. It's the best lightsaber duels we've gotten in 20 years. Obviously it's going to cost a lot of money.
Well,
Yeah.
I also think it had the most interesting and, as you put it, delicate story and narrative of anything so far, honestly, because it has to deal with something so important to people, so important to the story. Needs certain elements of it need to stay a secret to the rest of its own world. Um, it weaves this web of like not overtly telling you what the score is for anybody. Um, and I felt like it didn't get any props for that. And sure, if people were upset about dialogue choices or how how the characters interact with each other, whatever, that's all fine. But that doesn't mean that the thing was poorly written. It was obviously well written because
Yeah.
the story made people so upset because it's so intricate. It
Yeah.
was obviously well written from that. If you didn't think it was executed on screen that the way you would have wanted it to, that's a whole different conversation. Like my conversation with Ron all the time is that I hate that it was 8 episodes. I think they should either do 6 long ones or 12, you know,
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. But like, I feel like 8 makes it have to pace in a way that like I obviously am always wanting more, but it makes them so reliant on the last episode that there's no way that we could be cool with that being only one season.
I'll bring up, have you guys seen, or are you guys fans of Lord of the Rings at all?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So have you seen the Rings of Power show on Amazon Prime?
I haven't.
I
Have
haven't.
Okay, so here's the deal. I think Rings of Power is really, really good. And here's why. And I think it's the exact same conversation with the Acolyte, and it almost had the exact same outcome too. Rings of Power season 1 comes out, and the people who didn't like it were these Tolkien, who of course wrote the Lord of the Rings, Tolkien diehards, who were like, this is wrong because this, that, or the other thing. And it was almost like nitpicking, like they nitpicked the Acolyte in almost in a wrong way. Like, the story's the same, they're just telling it in a different light. And I'm not the biggest Lord of the Rings fan. I don't know the lore like I know Star Wars, and I never claimed to know everything about Star Wars either. But with the Lord of the Rings, with the Rings of Power show, it tells the story of like thousands of years before, so it's like hundreds of years before in Star Wars, and it tells the story of some characters that are in the Lord of the Rings movie, like Galadriel and Elrond and stuff like that. And it's really, really good. It's new, like the Acolyte. So the lightsaber duels are really, really good in the Acolyte. The fight and action scenes are really, really good in Rings of Power. Visually, it's Middle Earth, so it's like the 2000s CGI in the Rings of Power, or in the Lord of the Rings, still holds up today. But when you watch it against the Rings of Power, it's like night and day. They spent like $1 billion in this show. It's spectacular. But people really, really disliked it. Season 2 just came out last year, and the whole narrative changed. Everybody loved it. Everybody's like, this show's great. There's going to be 5 seasons. Everybody's like, this is fantastic. Keep telling this story. It's really, really good. And I think that's the same thing that would have happened with the Acolyte. You got to give a show time to breathe, time to tell a story.
Yeah.
We look at the Mandalorian. If the Mandalorian ended after 1 season, that season would be great, but you wouldn't get season 2. You look at the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars season 4, 5, 7. I like 6, but it's not probably the best. It's shorter. 4, 5, 7 are some of the best story that we've ever seen in Star Wars, from Ahsoka leaving the Jedi Order to, of course, the Siege of Mandalore, and all the Maul stuff with Mandalore as well. That stuff is incredible. You wouldn't get that if after the Clone Wars movie bombed and season 1 wasn't that good, or people didn't really like it much. If they just said, we're done. No, we're good. We're good. You wouldn't have gotten any of that. So I think people sort of, and of course we think it's good, but people who didn't think it was good didn't give it time to breathe, time to tell a story. Like they
Yeah.
were crapping on it after episode 2. Like they didn't even give it a chance.
Yeah.
And sometimes with a show like The Acolyte, which I don't really even think it needed, but a lot of times you need time to tell a story. You need time to tell a story correctly, and it takes multiple seasons. It takes more than 8 episodes, like you said, Nick. You need time to tell the story.
Yeah.
In these 30-minute episodes, you don't really have that much time, so you
Yeah.
need multiple seasons. So I think, and obviously I went on a whole tangent about the Rings of Power, but the Rings of Power is really good. So if you guys want something to watch, I definitely recommend it. The action's really good and the story's really good from a person who's not that big of a Lord of the Rings fan. But it's very similar to The Acolyte. That first season was crapped on. People really, really didn't like it. And then season 2 came around and they were like, okay, maybe they're telling a pretty good story here.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, well, yeah, because you gave it time to
Right.
tell a good story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think, hopefully all that'll come to fruition and maybe we will, like me and Nick are hoping that we will get a season 2 out of that. To go
Yeah.
back to your prequel thing, I was such a Star Wars fan, but there was a time that from the OG stuff, obviously, that I was involved in, and then it wasn't cool enough and you're in high
Yeah.
school. But when the prequels came out for me, that's what surged me into this. I mean,
Yeah.
it just took me to that next level again. I was just like, this was so good back then, and it's just so much better now to figure out all that, stuff and George is putting it on the screen. So
Yeah.
that was my surge again, just to get into this with the prequel. So for me, it was just because I was a fan probably, but when
Yeah.
that stuff came out, it was just like, oh, Star Wars is coming back. This is going to be amazing. We're gonna wrap it up a little bit here, but usually what I'll do is at the end here, we like to ask our guests, some of their favorite things. So, like you said, Return of the Jedi was your favorite movie.
Revenge of the Sith.
Revenge of the Sith. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. No,
So
you're good.
you got that. So Revenge of
Yeah.
the Sith, the animation. What's your favorite animation?
Yeah. So for me, it's Star Wars Rebels. And I know for a lot of people, it's the Clone Wars. And I get that. Clone Wars is really, really good. For me, Star Wars Rebels, I think after season 1, because season 1 is a lot of just sort of establishing those characters and all that stuff, the usual. Uh, but after season 1, season 2, 3, 4 are just like, yeah, you have some sort of filler episodes every once in a while, like you do in the Clone Wars and you do in the Bad Batch. From Twilight of the Apprentice, which is the last 2 episodes of season 2,
Mhm.
with Ahsoka and Maul and all that stuff and Vader, to the end of the show. It's just incredible storytelling.
Yeah.
Dave Filoni obviously now has a way bigger role at Lucasfilm, but he's coming off the backs of doing Clone Wars with George. And Clone Wars is Anakin, it's Obi-Wan, it's Padme, it's Palpatine, it's Dooku, it's the main characters of Star Wars. Rebels is not that. It's introducing a brand new cast of characters
Yes.
with Hera, with Kanan, with Zeb, with Ezra, with Sabine, Chopper. Uh, and it's really, really good at establishing those characters in season 1 and then telling an extraordinary story moving forward. It involves Thrawn, it involves Maul, it involves Vader, and all that fun stuff. And it's just a spectacular story. That's why it's my favorite. I won't go into Ahsoka yet because I can guess what your next question is going to be, but I will say a surprise to me was Bad Batch season 3 last year,
Yeah.
because Bad Batch season 1 was good. I thought the premiere was really good, and the second season was good with the finale of Tech dying. It was good. It was good. I didn't think it was on the same lines of Clone Wars or Rebels until season 3. Season 3 blew me away. I was shocked.
I think
Yeah.
we said the same thing when we were watching it, just like kind of out of nowhere went up in my
Yeah.
sort of like made my rankings harder.
Yeah, because I enjoyed it when it and
Yeah.
in 7 of Clone Wars, we meet these guys.
Yeah.
Which was cool, and we got that little bit of an arc, and then when they were like, okay, we're gonna push this even more, I was like, okay, cool, and it came out, and I was like, all right, that was pretty good, but yeah, it definitely pushed it up. The finale there, where hopefully at some point we're gonna see Omega,
Yeah.
in live action,
Yeah.
hopefully that'll come to fruition at some point, and same with Cal Kestis. So I think
Yeah.
that'll be really cool. And I know you talked about a little bit about that yesterday on your podcast, but I think it'll be cool if we're able to bring these characters into live action for whatever the fan service or whatever you want to call it. It's going to
Yeah.
be amazing once we get in there. So yeah. So the next one, live action. Which live action that's from
Series.
Mandalorian,
Yeah.
which is your
So,
favorite?
so it's really tough because The Mandalorian is 3 seasons, so you're going 3 versus 1. So I like to take them all individually. And with that, it's Ahsoka. Ahsoka to me, because I love Rebels so much, is Rebels season five. But it does everything so well. Each character in that show goes on an individual arc that is spectacular. Obviously, Sabine having probably the biggest one. Well, I mean, other than Ahsoka, she freaking dies and comes back to life again. But Sabine, she eventually is able to wield the Force. Another complaint, which is so crazy to me, is that
Yeah.
she's able to wield the Force after over a decade of training with Kanan and Ahsoka. Wild, but that's for another time, I guess. But Ahsoka from start to finish, it's the perfect example of what these 8 episode shows should be. I think, like The Acolyte too, is there's not a filler episode in that show to be seen. Mando has those filler episodes, and yes, they're good and they're side stories and side quests and stuff like that, and they're fun. But Ahsoka and Acolyte have just none of that. It's all just straight banger the entire way through. But Ahsoka specifically, it gives new lore with a new galaxy, Peridia. It gives new characters, Bale and Skull, Shin Hati, and it has a perfect balance of new and old. It gives you Anakin, it gives you the world between worlds, it gives you Clone Wars flashbacks, gives you
More Scott.
Thrawn, it gives you all these live action adaptations of these characters in a great way. And it could possibly be setting up Abeloth, which is insane.
Absolutely.
So
We've
it
talked
does
about it a couple of
so
times.
much. It does so much in just 8 episodes. And although a close second is The Mandalorian season two because of all those cameos, like we talked about before,
Yeah.
but not even that. I think everybody loves the finale of Mando season two. It's the 5th episode. It's the Jedi with Ahsoka's live action
Mhm.
first live action appearance, Grogu's name reveal. But just that
Yeah.
episode in general is really fun.
I literally just watched it last week. It took me like 2 days. I was just like blowing through it again, just
Yeah.
binging it. Again, like I said, even with Kenobi, for me was my favorite. I guess more in my heart because it's more of the OG that I got to see.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Ahsoka was phenomenal, and I can't wait for this second season. I think they're going to do a good job getting Dave and I think John possibly or something. John's going to have some sort of
Yeah.
involvement, I'm sure. So and when the two of them team up, as we all know, it's just phenomenal, which
Right.
which is great. So I'm definitely excited for that. So last one, favorite
Go for
character.
it. So favorite character is something that kind of can fluctuate for some people. For me, it remains the same. I think top 10 can fluctuate for me, top five, maybe even. But number one's always Anakin. It's remained Anakin for as long as I can really remember. I mean, he is the chosen one. That can be hotly debated. I've debated that quite a bit. I don't know if he is the chosen one. I'll leave it at that because the chosen one prophecy is a little strange within itself. But he's a great character. Obviously, the first 6 movies are the tragedy of Darth Vader, and you spend so much time with him in those 6 movies, in Kenobi, in 7 seasons of the Clone Wars. You just get so much Anakin all the time, and he's great. With that being said, my top three never change, and that would be put number two as Ahsoka for the reasons I've kind of mentioned before. Her series is the best one in my personal opinion. She's in Rebels, she's in Clone Wars, but her character, what she does for Anakin, is not really. It's understated almost. Like people don't really talk about it enough. Her leaving the Jedi Order is a big part of him falling to the dark side that
Absolutely.
people didn't see if you saw the movies. Obviously,
Yeah.
you got Palpatine, you got that stuff, you got his mistrust with the Jedi, you got Yoda telling him to sort of go cry about it when he tells him his mom's dying, stuff like that. So that's obviously a big reason as to why he falls. But Ahsoka leaving the Order, his Padawan
Yeah.
leaving the Jedi Order for not trusting them is a huge deal. And then number three is Maul. Talk about bringing a character back to life the
Yes.
correct way. Somehow Palpatine Returns gets so crapped on for good
Yeah.
reason, but I think you can explain it in a way that works. You look at Maul, it worked. He got chopped in half and fell down this massive tube. You think he dies, obviously, but he comes back, and he comes back in a great way where you get to see so much of him, and his story is incredible up until he dies. To even his death is incredible. Like he's
Yeah.
so badass. He's
Yes.
so awesome. So yeah, Darth Maul is number three for me, and it gives me hope that Darth Maul is three. That Palpatine's return can someday be explained a little bit better.
Yeah.
I don't. Do you read any of the books, Mike?
Yes. So I, are you gonna bring up what book are you gonna bring up?
Well, there's a couple. So there's like Empire's End has a few little tidbits in there. Um, that's one of the new. I think that was the first trilogy. That was the Aftermath trilogy.
Yeah.
And then there's like a few comic little tidbits. They never really get into it ever, but they sort of like plant a seed
Yes.
about, especially in Empire's End, they plant a seed that a whole part of his great work is, a contingency plan.
Yes, and that's what the Bad Batch does.
Yeah.
That's what Mando's even touched upon a little bit, and
Project
even
Necromancer and all that.
Project Necromancer, all that stuff. What's really cool, and maybe it's not one that you have read. I don't even know. I got this one. It's one of my favorites. It's Shadow of the Sith. Have you read that?
No, I've heard it's awesome.
So this one's really good. Honestly, after reading this book, it makes me like the sequels probably 10 times more. And I'm still on the fence about the sequels, or not really on the fence, but I see its
Yeah.
flaws, but this fills a lot of the gaps. It's Luke and Lando. It's pretty much a Luke and Lando story
Mhm.
before the sequels. And it's got young Rey and her parents and Ochi of Bastoon, who's
Oh,
the
wow.
bounty hunter,
Okay.
and it explains the dagger from Rise of Skywalker, which is huge for me. That
Yeah,
was just
that's cool.
weird. Why is that dagger there? Where did it come from? All that stuff. It's explained perfectly in this. It's actually from Palpatine. Palpatine comes to Ochi like in a vision or something like that. I kind of forget. I got to reread it, but uh, he is he can hear his voice. A Sith cultist comes to Ochi, but he can hear his voice or something like that. Or
Right.
maybe it's a holomess. I don't even know. I don't remember. But Palpatine hand delivers, kind of in a way, the dagger to Ochi and tells him that he has to kill Rey uh, and her parents. And that's sort of the mission that he's on. And then Luke and Lando are kind of on a different mission. Lando's looking for his daughter, which eventually ends up being the girl in Rise of Skywalker, or at least we
Yeah.
think. So it's really tying all the pieces together in this one tiny little book. I guess not tiny, but it's a pretty big book. But like I said, this is just more evidence to me that telling the story around the sequel trilogy, like the Clone Wars does, like the Acolyte does for the prequel trilogy, like Rogue One does for the original trilogy, telling the story around that trilogy can make it so much better. Filling in how Palpatine returned, really how he did, how Snoke rises to power, how Kylo falls to the dark side. It's like seeing the original trilogy with missing pieces and have never seen the prequel trilogy. So like you see Vader, you see Kylo, but you don't know, you never seen Order 66. Like it's
Yeah.
been talked about. Like you saw Luke with his hand on R2 with his temple burned, but you didn't see him actually do that or what led him to do that. You don't see Revenge of the Sith. There's no Revenge of the Sith for the prequel trilogy. And I think there needs to be one.
Yeah.
Yep,
Agreed.
for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's called. I'll have to Google it, maybe shoot you a message or something. But there's a comic, one of the Vader comics, where he's just going around all the galaxy with Ochi of Bastoon, and
I've not I've not read them, but I've seen the
they wind up on Exegol, and it's
yeah.
kind of a classic Palpatine lesson to Vader about don't mess with me. Sort of,
Yeah.
it's cool, but it gives like a tiny bit of context to the sequels without ever actually explaining anything. Is a lot like some of the little drops that they give in, Mandalorian or some of the novels. But it's a really, really cool comic that gives you a little bit of thirst quench on sequel lore. But
Yeah. And
uh,
when like already when you watch The Rise of Skywalker now, having seen like the Bad Batch, you're like, okay, well, Palpatine's been working on this plan
yeah,
since the prequel trilogy.
long time.
So
Yeah,
now already you're like thinking about it in a completely different light. You're like,
yeah,
instead of just somehow he returns, it's now, okay, he's been planning this for a long, long time.
yeah.
Yep, that's awesome. So we're gonna wrap things up. Mike, thank you so much for being on here with us. A guy who loves Star Wars. If you haven't checked it out, please go check it out. It's awesome. As Mike would say, smash a like on here for us, please. If you haven't already, you'll get some notifications once we do come live and when we do interviews like this. So hopefully we'll be able to talk to you again, Mike, and maybe get on a live podcast at some point, maybe during Andor. And thanks for the time for coming out here. Thanks for a great podcast that you do as well to just bring Star Wars and bring happiness to everybody and be good about Star Wars and be positive about Star Wars because that's what we need. And that's when we get more Star Wars, I think. So thanks again for being on here with us.
Thank you guys for having me. And I will say, like you just mentioned, if we keep going the negative route, they're going to stop making Star Wars. Do we
Yeah.
want that? No, we don't.
Nope.
But I appreciate it, guys. I really, really appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks,
Until
Mike.
next time, check out Star Wars Jedi Chat, and we'll see you then. May the Force be with you.